Good morning. It's Monday, February 22nd. How many of you out there remember when this used to be George Washington's birthday? But now it's just part of President's Week or whatever it is, or President's Day. In any event, there's no joy in Texas these days. And I think this is the perfect opportunity for Texas to go blue. They're a very red state up to this point. But the ineptitude of the government is an indication that small government and cheap government is not the way to run a state or a country. So I am hoping that the Texans wake up from this terrible winter disaster that they face and they go blue. Because the excuses these people are making and the blame that they're pissing around is unconscionable. Imagine having to boil water in the 21st century. That's crazy. Absolutely insane. So what happened to cause this disaster? It was a storm. Record low temperatures this February. Snow and ice made the roads impassable. And the state's electric grid operator lost control of the power supply. That left millions without access to electricity. And the blackouts extended from hours to days. And the state lawmakers all of a sudden woke up and called for investigations. And Texans are demanding accountability for the disaster. Well, I can tell you who's responsible for the disaster. First comes the electric grid. They don't winterize. They did not winterize their equipment. It's expensive to winterize. It's not expensive when you put it into winterize, but once it's up, it's very expensive to winterize. So they didn't do it. This same system are running in Minnesota and Michigan and places like that without any problem because all of that stuff up there is winterized, you see. Well, they know they have winter coming in those places, but in Texas, well, Texas is immune to winter. They never have winter. But that's bullshit. They had a bad winter in 2011 or sometime back then. So they should have known better. And then, of course, there's the government that accepts this whole thing. And now Greg Abbott is upset. He's upset. And on Thursday, in the middle of this disaster, then he called for the power companies and the lawmakers to winterize. And he called for a law and funding to better prepare Texas. Well, shit, he should have woke up when the thing was being built, for God's sakes. Now, maybe he wasn't governor at that time. But you see, this is what happens when you have small government, when you have penny-pinching government, when they don't think about things because they cost money. And if you look around and you see where all the small governments are, they're all red. And the people there are behind the times. So will Texas wake up and go blue? I don't know. I certainly hope they do. Because this may happen again. Right now, Texas is in a tough spot because retrofitting plants to withstand cold can be extremely difficult and expensive. Many of those plants already skimped on such upgrades to the infrequency of prolonged and widespread subphasing temperatures in the state. That's because they didn't learn a lesson from the 2011 storm that also caused power outages, but not like this one. This is a monumental screw-up because it would have cost very little to winterize when these plants, these power supply devices were put in place. When they were being put together, if they winterized, there would have been very little extra costs. But they probably wanted any bonuses to their executives or whatever. Certainly they weren't giving it to the people who were putting these things up. You know, when you look at this is the perfect example of all the people who deny climate change. Because the weather patterns in Texas are much different than they were 10 or 15 years ago. So if you're not paying attention to what's going on in the world around you, then you end up with disasters like this one. It's obvious that the planning board, or whoever planned this thing, was basing it on outdated weather patterns. And if you're not paying attention to the weather, you can't put in the proper heating and cooling systems. Yeah. It's just like the pandemic. You got to pay attention to the science, not to your visions, not to your outdated thinking, not to your stubbornness about what's going on around you, not to the beliefs that you hold so sacred. You got to think ahead. You have to know what's going on in the world. And obviously, the power companies certainly didn't, and the government officials certainly didn't. They're not paying attention to anything. And of course, there's always the fact of small government. We don't want to spend that much money. We don't want to educate our people. We would rather have them freeze to death. There are a lot of deaths caused by this episode in the lives of Texans. And hopefully they won't forget it. And maybe they'll vote blue for a change. And wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? President Biden declared Texas a disaster area, and they made federal aid available to a lot of the counties in Texas. Not all of them, a lot of them, but they give individual aid in addition to county aid. Plus, the Federal Emergency Management Agency previously sent supplies to the state of Texas to help them out. And of course, the federal government stands by ready to send more supplies like power generators and diesel fuel and water and blankets. But this whole episode points out that we are really not prepared in this country for climate change. Texas is a terrible example, but maybe those who are deniers of climate change will wake up. And here's the final straw. Some people in Texas got electric bills of over $7,000. Can you imagine that? They're getting billed for this fuck up. I think they're all entitled to a refund. So that's all I have to say this morning, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.